I'm kind of a word person. I'm kind of all about words, and so if we call something by a certain label, it needs to be accurate to work for me. So I struggle a little bit with the twice exceptional label. For instance, when I taught English as a second language, for some of them English was their third, fourth, or fifth language. Some of these kids get the point. They're not twice exceptional. They've got 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 things going on for them. So I sort of made my peace with the label. It is the commonly understood terminology that we use these days by thinking of them as exceptionally bright and exceptionally challenged in any several ways. I also started thinking of them, one of the books over here is called Different Minds. And some of these kids, they're just different brained, right? They're, you know, Asperger community calls those without Asperger's neurologically typical, NTs, right? Well, these often are kids that are neurologically atypical. And they might be the only kid, you know, for miles around with that particular configuration, but their brains just work a little differently, or a lot differently, than, especially than the way school teaches. You know, school, most teachers, maybe with some exceptions in the arts and other areas, they tend to teach in that sort of right brain, linear, sequential way is the dominant mode in school. And I think maybe it perpetuates itself because people who become teachers, they liked school, right? So that mode worked for us. So then we come to school and we do what worked for us. If you hated school, you probably did not become a school teacher. So, I have the perpetual laryngitis of September, October, so excuse me. We certainly also have issues with dual diagnoses and misdiagnoses. Some of these traits are hard to pin down, and one thing looks a lot like another, and I'll show you a slide about that in just a bit. You know, comorbidity, the presence of multiple diagnoses in one child. Another issue is that once they get a diagnosis, often the focus is on the deficit, and the giftedness is not attended to because they don't qualify for a gifted program in all the criteria. The areas of giftedness are just set aside, and the attitude is perhaps we're going to fix what's wrong with this child before we can treat them as a gifted kid. Okay, see some nods, that's good. And then another issue is that once they slap a label on that kid, okay, we figured it out. We got your diagnosis. We're done. We've solved the mystery. There's nothing more we need to do. We've got your diagnosis. Let's get you an IEP, and end of story, rather than looking at what the full picture is of what's going on for this kid. I took this graphic from Parenting for High Potential, and there was an article in the September that showed this, and I really liked it because when people are asking me, well, what is this new thing that you're doing? You know, this new specialty that you're interested in, and I've been trying to explain that, you know, using the bell curve, and kids who are out here on the ends of the intelligence bell curve, they're really very different from one another, and their minds work very uniquely. And then I saw this graphic which shows that, you know, around the mean, kids who are around the mean IQ of 100 are more similar to one another. And you go 2 standard deviations up, and those kids are, you know, they're certainly different than these kids, but they're more similar to one another. And, you know, like this is sort of the threshold for gifted ID. But when you go out here 2 more standard deviations, these kids are very unique. Their minds function in very individual ways. And sometimes it's a way that is a challenge or a problem, and sometimes they're just very unique thinkers. So, and if you really think about it, there's as much difference between, you know, the 100 and the 70 IQ as there is between the 100 and the 130, and you come out here and you're really out in your own kind of unique area. So that's sort of how I think of these kids. They're uniquely gifted, and so less of a focus on a pathology and more on the focus of the whole child. So that works for me. So are they gifted? Are they special ed? Are they both? Sometimes it's hard to tell, and sometimes we don't figure out what they are, and either they're able to compensate, use their intelligence to compensate, and so the deficits don't really show up, or vice versa, the deficits are strong enough that they mask the child's intelligence, and then they're not identified for gifted. And sometimes they just kind of appear average because the gifts and deficits are canceling each other out. I teach at the middle school level, 6th, 7th, and 8th. And I find that a lot of these kids rise to the surface in middle school for several reasons. Elementary school tends to be easier for the bright kids. They can make their way through and have one teacher all day long who knows them and understands them and works with them, and just the challenges aren't as strong. You get to middle school and the executive function demands go hugely up because they've got different teachers and different binders and lockers and the schedule and finding their way around the building and different styles and different requirements from their teachers, and it's a lot to take in. They get more long-term and independent projects to do at home that have multiple steps that they're expected to be able to negotiate. And so sometimes that's when the issues become more apparent. Other issues that appear more in middle school than elementary school is the peer culture changes. It's a little more judgmental, less accepting of kids who are different. There is this real urge to blend in middle school, and it's an issue for all our gifted kids. It's one of the rationales for starting this SUMA program that I teach in, so that kids could have a place where it was safe to be smart and different and idiosyncratic and quirky and all that stuff that we see in some of our gifted kids. It's more of an issue with our 2E kids, especially those with social communication issues. Sometimes if the child's been identified as gifted and they've been very successful in elementary school, and then they are having issues with success in middle school, then they blame the kid, right? Well, you're smart, what's wrong with you? Why aren't you succeeding? Are you lazy? Are you unmotivated? What's going on? So the kid gets blamed, and sometimes the kid blames him or herself, right? Well, I'm supposed to be smart and I'm not making it, so it must be me. Something's wrong with me. And sometimes, a lot of the time, that will lead to task avoidance. So rather than fail at something, and maybe people then discover that really I'm not as smart as I thought I was, they'll just avoid the task entirely, and then it's really hard to find an entry point to help them out. So if I'm not so much about pathologizing and labeling, then why get a diagnosis? Well, obviously, if you want to get them on an IEP and get them some help from the school system, you have to have some kind of a label that works within the school system. So that's one reason. But also, it helps the child sort of get a handle on what's going on, and that gives you that I'm not alone feeling. One of the parents, well, I should back up, I did my practicum paper for the TAG certificate. I interviewed parents of 7 of my students that had other diagnoses or labels besides TAG. And so some of what I'll be sharing is the words of the parents. So as one parent said, let the kid understand the diagnosis. She's smart enough to figure it out anyway. I mean, they know there's something different about them. So it helps them understand who they are, why school isn't working out for them as well as it could, and maybe they can stop blaming themselves. You know, especially with the Asperger's community, there's a lot of online groups or groups that meet in urban areas where they can be with other kids like them. They can read about it, they can understand. I have one student, he's not in my program, but I worked with him in my building, And he's got a diagnosis of Asperger's, and he's, you know, you look at him, if you know anything about Asperger's, you're like, yep, he fits. And his mom does not want him to have the diagnosis, and he just thinks he's really, really weird, and nobody likes him, and it kind of breaks my heart, you know, because he is smart enough to understand, and he could connect with other kids if he knew what it was. And it's just, you know, it's not just a label, it's who they are. It's just part of their makeup and who they are, and they need to understand that to make their way through life. So, you know, it is helpful to try to pinpoint what exactly is going on for this kid.